They say some animals are born with a gift, but what if that gift came from the stars themselves? On the night a rare meteor shower lit up the sky, a horse was born one unlike any other. He didn't just run. He listened, and when the world lost its way, he led the forgotten home. This is the story of Nova the horse, who could guide lost souls across the veil, and the woman who followed him into the unknown.
The sky cracked open that night, not with lightning, not with thunder, but with fire. Silent, streaking fire. 1,000 stars fell across the heavens in arcs of blue. Gold and silver, raining down like messages from forgotten gods. They lit up the prairie below, casting shadows that danced like ghosts between the tall grasses. The world held its breath, and in a quiet corner of that prairie, in the shadow of a silver-blossomed tree, a mare labored alone. Her sides heaved, her breath fogged in the chill of midnight, and with one final, strained, grown new life entered the world. A foal, coated in damp, shimmering gray like ash kissed by moonlight. His legs wobbled, eyes wide with the innocence of new beginnings. The mare lowered her head and nuzzled him gently. Above them, a meteor flared so bright, it lit the land like day for a single heartbeat. The foal blinked, and something ancient blinked back. The ranchers at Silver Ridge had heard the legends. They said the falling stars were a sign that when the heavens danced in fire, the boundary between the living and the dead thinned. Some called it folklore. Others feared it. But the oldest among them, the ones who had lived through war, flood, famine, and grief, they believed. And when the ranch hands found the foal the next morning, curled in the grass beside his exhausted mother, bathed in dew and silver dust, they didn't just see a newborn. They saw a prophecy. They named him Nova, for the night sky that birthed him, for the light he carried. Even in shadow, he grew faster than the others, not in size, but in awareness. His ears twitched. At the faintest sound, his gaze lingered on the horizon long after the others had turned away. He had an eerie calmness, nerved by storms, unmoved by loud noises or flashes of light. It was as though he existed half in this world and half in another. The ranch dogs wouldn't bark at him. The barn cats slept beside him. Even the crows normally. Loud and territorial gave him space. But the most curious thing? He always knew when someone was lost. It started with small things. One afternoon, a young girl visiting her grandfather wandered too far into the woods near the ridge. Were muffled by wind and leaves, the search parties fanned out. Hours passed. Dread built, then Nova returned alone from the far meadow, leading her gently by her torn sleeve. No one had told him she was missing. No, one had seen him leave, but he knew. Then came the storm. An older ranch hand, Abel, had taken his pickup down to the river crossing, not realizing how fast the waters had risen. The truck was swept off the road. They found it the next morning, door open, tracks leading toward the hills. Blood on the rocks, but no Abel. Helicopters came. Search teams scoured the cliffs. On the third night, Nova broke free from his paddock. He galloped into the forest. They found Abel the next morning, half conscious, leaning against Nova's shoulder in a clearing. No one had thought to check. He had no memory of how he got there, but he remembered this. There was light, and hoofbeats. I followed them. By his third year, Nova was no longer just a horse. He was a mystery, a legend in the making. People came from nearby towns to see him. Some brought lost dogs, hoping he could help. Others brought photographs of missing loved ones, spring prayers into a stall. He never reacted to any of it, until she came. Her name was Rowan. She didn't arrive with noise or fanfare. No truck, no trailer. It's just a backpack, worn boots, and the weight of sadness in her eyes. She asked the stable hand, "Do you still have the one born under the stars?" He hesitated. "Nova." She nodded. "I heard about him. I need to see him." Stable hand led her to the pasture. Nova stood at the far end, grazing beneath the old cottonwood tree. Rowan didn't call out. She simply stepped into the field and waited. Nova lifted his head. He looked at her, and he came. He moved. Slowly measured, deliberate. Not like a horse greeting a stranger, more like an old friend remembering a promise. Rowan knelt as he approached. Tears fell freely now. "I lost her," she whispered. "My sister. She disappeared 6 months ago. No leads, no trace. But the night she vanished. The sky looked just like the night you were born." Nova lowered his head. Their foreheads touched, and for the first time in years, Rowan felt something crack inside her, not from pain, but from the flood of something warmer hope. Rowan stayed. Days turned into weeks. She volunteered at the ranch, cleaned stalls, repaired fences, earned her keep. But every morning, she'd visit Nova. She'd never asked him for answers again. She didn't need to, because he was already showing her something. He began to walk certain trails, always just ahead of her, pausing at forks, looking back to see if she followed. He'd stop at hillsides, creek beds, forgotten places in the woods. At first, she didn't understand. But then, as the dreams began, she saw her sister, not clearly, just flashes. A lead scarf. A laugh. Running through a field, Nova always appeared beside her in the dream. Lit from behind, his mane glowing, Rowan would wake in tears. Nova would be waiting by her window. One morning, Nova led her to the edge of the Valaya place she had never seen before. An old cabin sat there, long abandoned, ivy on the roof, door half open. Nova stood still. Rowan approached slowly. Inside was nothing but dust and broken furniture. But under a loose floorboard, she found a photo, her sister, and beside her, date. Scribbled in ink, the day she vanished. The police opened a cold case review. Nova's involvement was never officially mentioned, but the leads that followed led to closure. Rowan's sister had died lost in the woods during a bad trip, panicked, disoriented, but her body was found, and she was brought home. Rowan buried her in the meadow, beneath the same cottonwood tree where Nova had first approached her. After the funeral, Rowan sat beside Nova, staring at the stars. "I think you knew all along." She said. Nova said nothing, but he stepped forward and rested his head against her shoulder. And in that quiet moment, the sky lit up again. Another meteor shower. Another night of falling stars. And far away in places no one could see, a few more lost souls began to find their way home. Because Nova was watching, still fog swept through the valley like a silent tide, swallowing the fences and fields in a sea of white. The morning sun was just a dim, silver blur behind the mist. Trees emerged as shadows. The barn loomed like a ghost ship from an old story. Nova stood still. He didn't pace like the other horses, didn't whinny for food or grow impatient for turnout. Simply waited, eyes wide, ears tuned to sounds no one else could hear. Rowan stepped out from the barn, wrapped in a thick coat. A thermos steamed in her hands, the scent of coffee mingling with the chilled air. She saw him at the edge of the paddock, not pacing. Watching, she paused. Over the past few weeks, she had learned to trust his stillness. It meant something was coming after. The meteor shower that marked the closure of her sister's story. Rowan had planned to leave, but something rooted her to the ranch. Not guilt, not grief. Nova, the mystery of him was no longer frightening. It had become something sacred. He wasn't just a horse. He was a gate, a guide, a gentle keeper of paths not easily seen. And now, something had shifted again. That afternoon, a truck rumbled up the long gravel road, tires crunching over loose stone. The fog hadn't lifted. The vehicle's headlights cut to narrow paths through the gray dot. It parked near the barn. A woman stepped out, tall, dark coat, sunglasses, despite the haze. Rowan approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman pulled off her glasses, eyes red-rimmed, exhausted. "My name is Teresa. I was told there's a horse here, one that finds people." Rowan didn't speak. Teresa glanced toward the paddock. "He was in my son's dreams. For weeks. My son disappeared 5 years ago during a trail ride in the Sierra foothills. I was 12. Rowan blinked. I'm sorry, she said gently. Teresa looked away. I thought I was losing my mind. But then I read your story. About Nova. About your sister. I thought maybe. Her voice cracked. Rowan placed a hand on her shoulder. Let me show you to him. Nova stood by the paddock gate as if he'd been waiting all morning for this moment. Teresa approached. Hesitantly, Rowan watched closely, ready to intervene if needed. But Nova didn't spook, didn't turn away. He walked up to her and lowered his head. Teresa reached out and touched his forehead with shaking hands. I dreamed of you, she whispered. So many times. You were standing in the mist, and my son was calling your name. Rowan stepped back, stunned. Nova didn't have a name in those dreams. Yet somehow, he had answered. That night Nova refused to stay in the barn. He paced along the fence, agitated but focused. Rowan watched him from her window. Then she heard the whisper of hooves outside, but they weren't Nova's. She rushed out into the darkness. Mist still hung thick in the air. Shapes moved along the edge of the woods, dim and slow. Like shadows trying to remember how to walk, Nova stood perfectly still, watching, listening. Then he moved down the path, to the trees. Rowan followed. They reached the base of an old ravine. The place wasn't marked. No trails, no signs. Just rocks, roots, and forgotten silence. Nova stopped. Rowan knelt down, brushing away layers of moss and debris. There beneath a collapsed tree was a bone. Then another. She called the authorities. They returned in the morning. With search teams, dogs, and forensic gear, it took days to piece together, but eventually they confirmed it. A child, age 12. Lost in the woods, no sign of trauma, likely fell, couldn't move, died waiting. They found a locket tucked in the collar of the remains, inside his name, Jonas. When Teresa returned, she didn't cry. She stood beside Nova, whispered a quiet thank you, and pressed her cheek to his mane. I knew you were real, she said. I just didn't know how. Rowan later found her sitting beneath the cottonwood tree, writing a letter she planned to leave at her son's final resting place. When she handed it to Rowan, she smiled. I don't know where he is now, she said, but I believe he got home. Word spread slowly, not through newspapers or television, but in the quiet, whispered way that real stories do, shared between grief counselors, hospice nurses, and people who had run out of places to search. They came with questions, with items, with names Nova didn't react to most, but occasionally he would step forward, as if drawn by some invisible thread, and always the fog would roll in. One night, Rowan heard a knocking at her door. A man stood there, mid-60s, holding an old journal. My brother went missing in 1982, he said. We were hiking near this area. Never found him. But last week I found his old drawing of a horse. He held up the page. The drawing was crude but unmistakable. Nova. Rowan led him to the paddock. Nova stepped forward, and something ancient passed. Between them, the man began to cry. Rowan didn't need to ask. Nova had already chosen that fall. The first snowfall came early. Rowan wrapped herself in blankets and watched from the loft. Nova stood out in the field, mane whipped by wind, body still as stone. The stars began to appear. Then, like sparks from a flint, the sky cracked open. Meteors again. Long, slow arcs of fire across the heavens. Rowan stood down in the pasture. She saw shapes forming, dim figures, moving, not threatening, just. Lost. Nova began to walk. Rowan followed, and as they moved into the field together, she saw them clearly, people, faces full of longing, and every one turned toward Nova. They called it a gift, a miracle. But Rowan knew better. It wasn't about finding bodies or solving mysteries. It was about closure, about helping what was lost become found. Again, Nova wasn't just a horse. He was a compass, a lantern in the dark, a bridge. That night, After the sky had gone dark again, Rowan sat beside him, under the stars. "Where do you come from?" she asked softly. Nova didn't answer. But above them, one final meteor blazed a path across the sky and vanished. The days grew shorter. The winds carried the sharp edge of coming winter. Trees dropped their leaves like confessions, the ground below covered in amber and gold. At Silver Ridge Ranch, preparations for the season turned the peaceful rhythm of life into something closer to urgency, mending fences, stacking hay, sealing drafty doors. But in the center of it all, one thing remained unchanged. Nova, the horse. Born under fire, the one who walked between this world and something beyond it, Rowan had begun to call it the drift, that space between breath and silence, between being found and being forgotten. She didn't know what lay beyond it, but Nova seemed to see it as clearly as she saw fences and trees, and something was stirring inside it again. It started with a sound, whispers, not voices. Not exactly, but threads of sound that curled like fog around the edges of the property. Rowan first noticed them one evening while walking the perimeter with Nova. The wind was calm, the trees still, and yet she heard it. A hum, a murmur, a breath caught on the edge of a forgotten name. Nova stopped. At the fence line near the north pasture, his ears flicked forward. His body stilled. Rowan placed her hand on his shoulder. "What is it?" He didn't move. Not yet, but she could feel it building. Something was coming. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Unmarked envelope, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. A young woman, early 20s, windswept hair, wide smile. In the background, a painted horse with one blue eye and one brown. On the back of the photo, scribbled in black ink, "I used to ride here. I never made it home." Rowan read the note again. And again, there was no name, no date. But the photograph had been taken somewhere nearby. She recognized the hill behind the fence, just west of the orchard trail. Nova stood at the edge of the barn, watching her, as if waiting for her to understand. Rowan took the photo. Out to the pasture that evening. Nova met her halfway. She held it out to him. He lowered his head, nostrils flaring as he examined the image. Then, without sound or signal, he turned and began to walk. Rowan followed. They left the property line and crossed into the dense woodland. The sun dipped low behind the treetops, casting the trail into deep shadow. Leaves crunched beneath their steps, somewhere far off. An owl called into the coming dark. Nova didn't hesitate. He led her to a place she had never seen before, an old trail marker, overgrown, faded with age. It pointed west. Rowan brushed off the dirt, etched faintly into the wood, Emma's Ridge. They hiked for nearly 2 hours. The trail grew steep, then narrow, then steep again. Rowan's legs ached. Her breath came in sharp bursts. Nova pressed on, just before dusk. They reached a plateau overlooking the entire valley, and there at the edge of the cliff stood a single wooden post, twisted by wind and time. Nailed to it, a rusted horseshoe. Rowan approached. Below the post, half buried in moss, lay a single boot. She knelt. Her hand trembled as she reached into the earth and uncovered something small and broken, a bracelet with colored beads. The same bracelet worn by the woman in the photo. Rowan's heart pounded. Nova stood behind her, still watching, waiting that night. They reported the location. Authorities arrived with cadaver dogs and climbing gear. It took days, but eventually, they found her. Emma Lynn, age 24, went missing 6 years ago during a solo trail ride. The same week, a freak snowstorm had closed the ridges. She had tried to descend too quickly and fell. Her horse had survived and been found days later. Emma, they thought, had simply disappeared into the forest now. Now she had come home. When Emma's mother arrived, she didn't speak at first. She walked to Nova, stared into his eyes, then hugged him. "I knew you'd find her," she said. "I dreamed of this horse for years. Thought I was imagining it." Rowan nodded. I thought that too. More stories began to arrive. A man who vanished while hunting in 1997. A teenager who ran away during a blizzard in the mountains. A woman who never returned from her sunrise trail ride. Nova responded to some others. He ignored. Rowan started to understand why. Not everyone was ready to be found. Some still wandered the drift. Not every whisper was ready for words. One night, Rowan stood by the paddock as the first snow began to fall. Nova grazed nearby, his breath misting in the moonlight. She turned to him. "What are you, really?" He didn't look up, but behind her, the wind stirred. Voices again. Clearer this time. Names, places, laughter, regret. The sound of lives once lived. And Rohan, for a moment, felt as if she stood in two worlds at once. Then Nova turned, and the moment faded. That winter, Silver Ridge became more than a ranch. It became a place of pilgrimage. People brought not only their grief, but their gratitude. Nova never asked for anything. He only watched, and when the time came, he walked, leading the willing, guiding the lost, giving light to those who had none left to carry. Rowan sat by the fire one night, journal open in her lap. She wrote, "It's not about finding what's gone. It's about reminding it where to return. Nova doesn't seek, he invites, and if the soul is ready, it follows." She paused, then added, "There is something waiting beyond the fence, and he knows the way." Snow blanketed the valley like a memory, soft and unrelenting. Silence. Even the air felt still, as if the land were holding its breath. Nova stood alone in the north pasture, unmoved by the cold. His coat shimmered silver beneath the moonlight. His ears were forward. Listening, Rowan watched from the barn door. Bundled in a heavy coat, a mug of tea warmed her hands. But her thoughts churned colder than the wind. Something was different tonight. Not wrong, just heavy, as if the drift, that liminal space between worlds Nova walked so easily, had thickened. Earlier that day, a group of strangers had arrived. They came in an old pickup, 3 adults, tight-lipped and weary-eyed. Siblings, they said.
Oh.
In their 40s now. They were looking for their father. He had disappeared decades ago, before any of them were even teenagers. One day he left on horseback to check the mountain fence. and never returned. They'd tried everything. Search parties, dogs, helicopters, even psychics. Nothing now. With their mother gone and only each other left, they'd followed a whisper of a rumor. A story about a horse born under falling stars, about a ranch where the past didn't stay buried. Rowan led them to the paddock. Nova approached without hesitation. When he reached the siblings, he stopped and lowered his head. It's not out of submission, not out of exhaustion. Recognition. Rowan stepped forward. He sees something. The eldest brother, Lucas, whispered, "I remember a horse like this. He was with my father the day he left. But it wasn't Nova. Couldn't be." "No," Rowan said quietly. "Nova wasn't there then, but he remembers." That evening, Nova refused shelter again. He stood at the western tree line watching the setting sun fade behind the snow-dusted pines. When Rowan approached, he turned his head once just enough. She understood. Time to follow. The path was rough, cloaked in snow, but Nova moved with sure steps. Rowan trailed him, flashlight in, hand the cold biting her cheeks. The trees were heavy with frost. Occasionally, a branch would snap beneath the weight, the sound cracking through the stillness like a rifle shot. They walked for miles, then he stopped. They had reached the edge of a clearing, long hidden by undergrowth and time. In the center stood an old trail marker, half-rotted. Beneath it, barely visible beneath the snow, was a saddlebag. Rowan brushed away the snow with gloved hands. Inside were rusted tools, a compass, and a leather journal. She opened it. The first page read, "If anyone finds this, tell my children I tried to get back. But the storm was too strong. I didn't want them to remember me as lost." It was signed James A. Langley, the man who vanished. When the siblings returned the next morning, The silence in the barn was profound. Rowan handed them the journal. Her fingers trembling despite her breathless explanation, Lucas read the name, and his knees gave out. Nova stood nearby, unmoving. Lucas looked up at him and whispered, "You brought us here." Nova lowered his head. The brother cried openly now, as did his sisters. No longer for what they lost, but for the chance to say goodbye. After they buried the journal beneath the old cottonwood tree, the siblings left. But before they did, Lucas turned back. He wasn't just found. He said he came home. Nodded that night. Nova stood beneath the stars for hours, and the meteors returned. Not many, just one or two, but enough. Weeks passed. More came. A woman searching for her childhood dog, a veteran haunted by fallen comrades, a widower who never found. Where his wife's plane went down, Nova guided some. Ignored others, but always he listened, and Rowan began to understand. Something deeper. Nova's gift wasn't limited to the dead. It was also for the living, the ones who wandered not through woods, but through grief, through guilt, through longing that no compass could cure. One afternoon, a boy arrived. He was no older than 10. His coat was too big, his shoes too thin. Rowan rushed outside. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The boy didn't speak. He only pointed to Nova. Rowan looked at the horse. Nova didn't move, but his ears perked. His breath quickened. Rowan knelt. "Can you tell me your name?" The boy whispered. "It's Eli." "Where did you come from?" He looked behind him at nothing. Rowan's chest tightened. "Eli, are you alone?" He nodded, then quietly added, "I think I got lost a long time ago." He gave Eli food and warmth. No one claimed him. No one matched his description. He didn't appear on any missing persons lists. And yet he was real. Solid, alive. But Nova watched him differently. Not as a guide, as a guardian. Eli stayed for days. Then one morning, Nova approached Rowan with his head low and body tense. He stepped into the loft. Something he had never done before. Eli was sitting there. Drawing in an old journal, Nova touched his nose to the boy's shoulder. Eli stood and walked with him into the pasture. Rowan followed. They reached the far end of the property where an old gate stood, chained for decades. Rowan had never opened it, but Nova nudged the latch, and it fell. Beyond it lay a road, one that hadn't been traveled in years. Eli turned to her. "Thank you," he said, then, without a word, stepped through and vanished. Rowan searched for him for hours, days, but there was no trace. No footprints, no footprints, no sin. Only the journal he left behind, inside a final page. "I was never supposed to stay. But I'm not lost anymore. Thank you for the light." Nova returned to the barn that night. He was tired. He had aged. Rowan could see it now, in the slower turn of his head. The weight in his shoulders. He had carried so many, but he had never once faltered. Until now? She brushed him gently, tears in her eyes. "You don't have to do it forever," she whispered. "You've done enough." Nova rested his head against her chest. For a long moment, they just breathed. Then outside, the sky cracked again, and 1,000 stars fell. The wind had changed. It no longer sang with its usual wandering tune. It whispered now, in hushes, and pauses as if holding back tears. The sky above Silver Ridge was heavy with clouds, not storm clouds. It's not quite, but thick and low. It's the kind that dim the world into an endless gray hush. Nova hadn't moved from the cottonwood tree in 2 days. Rowan brought him water, grain. A blanket draped over his flanks for warmth. But he didn't eat anything. He just stood, watching the tree, watching the path. Waiting, Rowan sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her. Watching him, something was ending. She felt it in her bones. That night, the stars returned. For the first time in weeks, the sky opened like a storybook, every page scattered with constellations. The stars blinked down, crisp and clear, and the moon hung low and full, casting the world in silver. And then it happened. The meteor shower? not predicted, not tracked, but real. Rowan stood in the field, breath caught in her throat, eyes wide as the sky burned with streaks of light white gold blue, fire from the heavens raining without sound. She turned toward Nova. He was walking, not fast, but steady, toward the northern fence. Rowan followed. He led her through the pasture gate and beyond. The old service trail, into the forgotten part of the woods. The snow here was untouched, soft and glowing under the moonlight. Rowan recognized the path. It was the first trail he had ever taken her down. The one that had led to her sister. But this time, the air was different. Charged thin, like a veil was. Lifting, they reached the meadow, the same place Rowan had buried the photo. The same place the stars always seemed to fall the brightest. Nova stopped in the middle and turned to face her. His breath rose in plumes of mist. His eyes shone, not with weariness, but with peace. Rowan took a step forward. Is this? Lowered his head. She placed her hand against his forehead. And in that moment, she saw them. They appeared from the trees, figures in the mist, dozens of them maybe. Morin women, children, some smiling, some solemn, some still searching. Rowan's breath caught. Among them, she saw familiar faces. Eli, Emma, Teresa's son, even her sister, just for a moment. Standing taller, lighter, waving once before fading like a wisp of fog, Nova took one step forward, and the souls parted for him. He walked through the center of them. Slow and steady, a procession began to form behind. Rowan stepped back. She wanted to go with them, but she knew she couldn't. This wasn't her journey at the edge of the field. The mist thickened. It rose like a wall of smoke, shimmering faintly with light. It's not threatening, just... Final Nova turned back to her one last time. Their eyes met, and something inside her broke not from sorrow, but from the weight of gratitude he had carried. Them all carried her, and now he was going home. He stepped into the mist and was gone. The light faded, the souls faded, and the meadow was still again. Rowan sat in the snow for hours. When she returned to the ranch at dawn, the sky was clear. The barn was silent. Nova's stall was empty. But something lingered. Not scent. Not sound. Presence. A calmness. Like the air itself had exhaled. Word spread quietly in the months that followed. People still came. They left notes, photographs, gifts. No. One spoke above a whisper in the paddock, but they all seemed to feel it. The silence there wasn't. Empty, it was full. Rowan restored the barn fully. She built a small bench beneath the cottonwood tree, hung a carved sign. In memory of Nova born of stardust, returned to it, he led the lost home. On the anniversary of his last walk, Rowan stood in the field beneath the stars. The wind was gentle. The meteors returned, just a few enough. She smiled, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." And far beyond where light becomes starlight, and starlight becomes memory, a single hoof step echoed softly in a field that never ends. The end.